For episode 3, Kimber of the Holograms is about to be the victim of a serious controversy, so the story begins in Venice Beach, in California, of course. Now you're probably wondering why are the holograms are going to Venice Beach? It's because they have an interview that's there. You remember Sean Harrison from last season in episode 9? Well, he's back, and he too has the same interview as the holograms did. Now, remember in the last episode, Rhea, aka Carmen, has just recently become the fifth member of the Holograms, and Jetta, aka Sheila, is the fourth member of the Misfits. Now, you can tell that Rhea is extremely nervous because it's her first interview since she became the fifth member of the band. Of course, also there at the beach were Connie and Terry. They were the reporters of California Beat. Now you're probably wondering what was Sean's interview all about? It's because he told Connie and Terry that he has a new record deal. So anyway, long story short, after the She Makes an Impression song, which was recently sung since episode 13 in last season, Connie and Terry, who were the reporters, did what they know best, doing their interviews. So anyway, Kimber of the Holograms went to visit Sean to see how he's doing. So after the hologram said hi to Sean, that's when Sean wants to know if he can have a word with Kimber for a while. But then Connie had to escort Sean for an interview and said, "Talk to you later, Kimber," and so he left the tent. So after Sean left, Rhea wants to know from Kimber, "Do you know Sean?" "Of course I do," Kimber said. So speaking of Sean, back with him, he was talking to Connie and Terry, the reporters. Everything was going well until the Misfits, as always, do what they know best, interrupt and crush the interview. And by how, you may ask? By using the Doom buggies, of course. So by the time that the Misfits arrived, you can tell that Terry and Connie are not exactly amused, but went ahead and went with the Misfits interview anyway, just the way it's planned. As you may have guessed it, Terry has a crush on Pizzazz and asked if she was available for dinner. "Well, maybe," Pizzazz said. After the interview with the Misfits came to an end with Connie and Terry, Kimber, as you may have guessed it, is sitting, writing in her diary. That's when minutes later Sean shows up. Being curious, Sean wants to know what Kimber's writing in that diary. "Well, it's just some thoughts for a song, that's all," Kimber said. "You see," Kimber said, "whatever I write in my diary, I pour out all my thoughts right here." So what Kimber is saying to Sean is that whatever she writes in her diary is her means of escape, of what she's feeling, how she's feeling, and etc. So then it's Sean's turn to say, "Forgive me for saying this, but I've been thinking about it for months. Would you like to go to lunch with me? A little later?" "And even better," Sean says, "I would like for you to write a song for me." "Really?" Kimber asked. "Sure," Kimber says. "I'll see you later," and so she heads off with Connie to join up with the rest of the bandmates for an interview. But what Kimber doesn't realize is that she had accidentally left her diary behind. And behind the bushes was Jetta of the Mistress, and she got the hold of Kimber's diary. Back with the holograms, it's now their turn to be interviewed by Connie and Terry. Then Jim just told Connie the good news that she and the bandmates will be performing later at the roller skating rink. And then later on, they'll have a conversation with Sean and be on the Harriet Horn show. Next, Connie went over to Rhea to ask how she felt about it since she's the member of the band, the fifth member to be exact. "Well, to tell you honestly," Rhea said, "it's definitely a dream come true." Anyway, meanwhile at the hotel, the Misfits were watching the exact same show as they've been interviewed at moments before. But then suddenly, while watching TV, Kimber said, and I quote, that she and her bandmates are much too boring for a gossip, especially for someone like Harriet Horn. Well, that comment made the Misfits upset. So after Possessed turns off the TV, in the meantime, Jetta of the Misfits was busy reading Kimber's diary after Roxy made a complaint that their segment had just been cut out. Then it's Possess's turn to make her case to say, "I would love to slam on sweet Kimber," she said. So you know what this means. Possess, as ruthless as she is, has a plan that maybe Harriet Horn would love to have the Misfits on her show. "Maybe there's a way," Jetta suggested. So Jetta made a suggestion that maybe we can use Kimber's diary to slam her good reputation, her mean streak and all. So Jetta went ahead and read Kimber's diary, the entry about Roxy, of course. But that's not all. Jetta also read the entry on Possess in Kimber's diary as well. So Possess snatches the diary away from Jetta and has a look at it for herself. So now that every misfit is gathered outside in the patio area, as you may have guessed it, it's now Pizzazz' turn to read Kimber's diary to say how she badmouthed all the members of her group one time. While looking at Kimber's diary further, Pizzazz, as you can tell right then that she's on to something. She can use Kimber's diary against the Holograms to take care of that reputation, to damage it, if you will. And why is that? Because it's all part of the plan. Meanwhile, at the Bayview Hotel where the Holograms are staying at, as you can tell, Rhea just answered the door to the bellhop that there are letters for Jim and her bandmates. So one at a time, Rhea passed out all the letters to Jerica, Kimber, Asha, and Shayna, well, except for herself, because she never had one. Now, don't forget, the reason why Rhea didn't have a letter is because she was never the member of the Holograms yet until she was voted recently in the last episode. So after each of the hologram members read the letters, they had no idea where it was from and what came about. So when Kimber came out minutes later, so Kimber was asking her bandmates, where did those letters come from? And then she looks in her bag and everywhere else, and that's when she realized that her diary was missing. Then Kimber realizes that that explains the torn letters, and they're from the diary that she had, which is now missing. Well, that's because earlier that morning, it's because Kimber was unaware, and she should have realized right then that someone has her diary, and that someone was Jetta of the Misfits. But why? Kimber should have known right then that it was all part of the plan. The Misfits' plan, that is, to manipulate both her and her bandmates. But even though Kimber's friends had forgiven her, and that's when Rhea gave Kimber the letter. And when Kimber looked at it, it said, quote, Cool Trash has your diary. Now, Cool Trash is the name of the magazine. So Kimber realized that must be where her diary went. So you know what this means. Kimber and her friends had no time to waste. They must head to Cool Trash magazine to get Kimber's diary back. So meanwhile, Jim and the Holograms had arrived at Cool Trash magazine's office. So you know what this means. That means the rest of the bandmates can go undercover, well, except for Kimber, of course. So, Jerica, along with her friends, except for Kimber, go right inside Cool Trash magazine's office to talk to Mr. Slugman, who's the publisher. So by the time that the girls, except for Kimber, who had disguised themselves, went into Mr. Slugman's office, the first thing that Kimber did was to confront him and said that she wants her diary back. Then, one by one of the women who were in their disguises, Aja as a lawyer, and of course Sheena as a stenographer. Now you can tell that Mr. Slugman's not happy about it at all and asked everybody to leave. By the time that Mr. Slugman pushed his papers, Kimber not only gets her diary back, but then everyone soon left the office. But now here comes the bad news. By the time that the holograms left the office, they were unaware that Roxy of the Mistress, who hasn't left Mr. Slugman's office, she told him, we don't really need a diary anyway. At least we got the letters. When Mr. Slugman looked at the letters, he seemed impressed with Roxy. He told Roxy that all he needs to do now is to have an interview with Sean. Back with the holograms, after they left Mr. Slugman's office, they discovered that there's a problem. Their glitter and gold roaster has a couple of flat tires. But that's not all. They saw Mr. Slugman pull out in his car with Roxy in the car with him. If that's not bad enough, that's when Kimber realized, oh my goodness, I was supposed to meet up with Sean at the restaurant. The worst of it all is that Kimber was supposed to be meeting him there about an hour ago. And that's where Roxy was heading right now, along with Mr. Slugman. So meanwhile at the restaurant, Sean was having no luck trying to reach Kimber over the phone, and she was supposed to be meeting up with him. After Sean hangs up the phone, that's when he hears the voice of Possess asking, what's the matter? Are you by yourself or something? But she's not alone. The rest of the Misfits were with her, Roxy, Stormer, and Jetta. So that's when Possess decides to sit on the right hand side of Sean while Jetta sits on his left side. And taking a picture in front of Sean was Roxy. And of course, next to Roxy is Mr. Slugman, the publisher of Cool Trash Magazine. So after Roxy took the picture, that's when Sean shoved Possess right out of the chair. So when it's Mr. Slugman's turn to talk to Sean, that's when Sean made his case to say, I don't give on scheduled interviews like this. So when Slugman was asking Sean what he thought of Kimber, but what Sean doesn't realize is that he's being recorded with every word he said. So Sean told Mr. Slugman that, quote, he could care less about his opinion and that Kimber is a free-spirited person. So Mr. Slugman said, really? Tell me about Possess. What did you think of her? Well, let me tell you something, Sean said. Possess is indeed a real woman, but don't make me laugh. So tell me, Mr. Slugman asked, is Possess going to write a song for you or what? I'll write it for her, Sean says, but I won't sing it. So after that, Sean heads off. So after Sean left, that's when Mr. Slugman told the Misfits that he had recorded every word that Sean said to him. Every bit of detail, so to speak. Then suddenly the phone rings. It was Jetta who answered the phone, and it was Kimber asking for Sean. So Jetta tells Kimber, I'm sorry, but I'm afraid that Sean's run off with somebody else, like Pizzazz of the Misfits. Then Jetta said to Kimber to add more insults to say, why don't you try Sean's fan club or something? So after Jetta ends her phone call with Kimber, at the same time Mr. Slugman says, I could just see the headlines now. In the meantime, the Glitter and Gold Roadster is getting 2 new tires since they've been flat. Meanwhile, back at the Holograms room at the Bayview Hotel, that's when Kimber receives her mail. When Kimber opens the envelope, she couldn't believe it. She just saw a picture of Pizzazz and Jetta sitting right next to Sean that Roxy took earlier back at the restaurant. As Kimber ripped up the picture that was taken by Roxy earlier, that's when Rhea asked her, what are you going to do about it? I'm going to stand by with Sean all the way, Kimber said. I'm not going to let these misfits get to me, no matter what. So later that evening at the Roller Rockout roller skating rink, well, good news now that the Glitter and Gold Roadster has 2 new tires, the holograms arrived there as planned. So not only did the holograms arrive there, also there was Sean and his band, playing there just like any band would do. And just like what any people would do, they were roller skating, having a good time, and that's when Kimber spotted Sean on the stage. And when Kimber meets up with him, that's when, as always, the Misfits interrupted them. And that's when Pizzazz says, everybody listen up. Let's really shake up the place a little bit. And what better way to shake things up was with the Misfits song called Scandal. It was during that song of Scandal that Pizzazz does what she knows best, recording every conversation that Kimber or Sean said on the tape player. Next thing you know, Jetta does her job of passing out all the cool trash magazines to every crowd there was, and there was a picture of Sean and Kimber everywhere. So when the song ended, what Kimber saw was unbelievable. Her own picture on the cover of Cool Trash magazine. But that's not all. There's an article that says, quote, Sean loves Kimber, but he could care less. But she's not the only one who saw the article. The rest did too. Kimber ran out of the roller rink and with her roller skates. You can tell right then that the controversy has become too much for her. And so she left the roller rink and avoided being hit by a bus. Sean tries to catch up with her, but he was unsuccessful. Then minutes later, Harriet Horn, who was the host of her own talk show, shows up to talk to the mistress about them being on her show. So when Harriet was asked by Pizzazza what she thought of it, I do have to admit, Harriet said, that's very impressive. So you know what this means? Not only did Harriet agree to allow the mistress to be on her show, but only one condition, to be teaming up with the holograms. Now don't forget, the holograms were supposed to be on the same Harriet Horn show too. So, back with Kimber, you can tell that she couldn't help but what's going on in her head. She caught the bus back to Starlight Mansion. And by the time she arrived there, she just passed by Ashley of the Starlight Girls in the living room and went up the stairs. Ashley of the Starlight Girls, who saw Kimber passing her by, she calls the holograms back at the Bayview Hotel to tell them what happened. The first thing that Ashley did was to apologize for calling them. No, no, Jim says, you did the right thing. And that earlier she just saw Kimber who just made it back. And Jim was more than relieved to see that she's safe. So after Jim ends her phone call with Ashley, the holograms are planning to head back to Starlight Mansion first thing in the morning. But then Jim suggested to let Kimber deal with it her own way. So back at Starlight Mansion in Kimber's bedroom upstairs, you can tell that Kimber couldn't sleep. She couldn't think because the scandal has become so out of control that it's taking Kimber to a downward spiral. Now you can tell right now that Kimber is going through some emotional distress. You can also tell that Kimber couldn't control her emotions and her feelings anymore, so she heads downstairs to Synergy's room. So when Kimber went into Synergy's room, she says, I need a favor from you. What can I do for you, Synergy says? Just change me into something else, something that's stronger. So Synergy did just that. So Synergy wants to know from Kimber, is there something you're going through? A phase, perhaps? I wanted to be strong, Kimber said. You know, Synergy says, your father did want you to be strong, but being tough is another. What do you mean? Kimber asked. And what did my father say about me? Kimber asked. Now don't forget, Emmett, who has since passed away last season, is also Jericho's late father, too. Well, Synergy says, your late father, before he died, he told me to tell you that you're a natural charmer. See for yourself, Synergy said. And when Synergy allows Kimber to see for herself, the first image that Kimber sees was herself as a child when a butterfly landed on her nose. Synergy said that Kimber knew right then that she's been a born charmer since. The next image that Kimber sees was herself when she got older. It was at the time when a cat had a mousetrap in his paw. So that means, in Synergy's response, that means that Kimber was very sensitive. That means that she can tell that when a cat's in pain. The next image that Kimber sees was herself falling off the bicycle when she's trying to ride it for the first time. The next image that Kimber sees was when, at the time when Emma was alive, she made a Valentine's Day card for him. According to Synergy, it explains that Kimber was a creative person. Next, Kimber sees another image, herself when she was a teenager playing her guitar on her bed in her bedroom. According to Synergy, Kimber, ever since then, was drawn to music while growing up. The last image that Kimber saw was herself when she was only 11 years old when she performed at the talent show. According to Synergy, it was at the time that Kimber wrote a song for the talent show, but she got humiliated, heckled, and laughed at. And so she ran off the stage to be comforted by her late father, Emmett. Also, according to Synergy, Kimber, after she was humiliated and laughed at and comforted by her father and gave her the support that she needs, she went back out and performed, just like she planned. Also, according to Synergy, after Kimber finished her song, the audience cheered and loved her for it. Synergy also explains that the moment that your late father knew that one day you'll grow up to have a music business just like your sister, Jerica. So after the images disappeared, that's when Synergy said to Kimber, so you see, your father and Jerica's father could have never have been more prouder. Also, as Synergy says in her case, that now that Kimber's all grown up and so is Jerica, they both had a music business together. And also, as Synergy said, that Kimber has survived more obstacles and challenges more than she knows. So Synergy wanted to know from Kimber, what did her late father say during that talent show when she was humiliated. After Kimber thought it over, then she remembered what her late father, also Jerica's late father, said the day at the talent show. He said to be true to yourself. Just believe in your song and everybody will love you. Just give an audience a chance. Once Synergy changed Kimber back, she asked her a question. Synergy, that is, can you still be true to yourself? I think so, Kimber said. So now that Kimber got her confidence back, she wrote herself a song on the back of the shoebox. The top of it, to be exact. So after Kimber finished writing her songs, she slept on the floor in Synergy's room for the rest of the night, until the very next morning when Rhea came in and asked if she was okay. So when Kimber woke up and saw Rhea, you can tell that Rhea's very glad to see not only that Kimber's okay. So Kimber wants to know from Rhea, are they still going to be on Harriet Horn's show later? Well, you don't have to go if you don't have to, Rhea said. Don't be silly, of course I will, Kimber said. When Rhea asked her why, and Kimber says, well, I got some good news. I just wrote us a song. Well, that's great, Rhea said. So you know what this means. Not only did Kimber have her confidence back, but both of the women had left both Synergy's room and the Starlight Mansion at once. So you know what this means. The holograms are not only in time to be on Harriet Horn's show later on that evening. So meanwhile there, now you can tell that the Misfits are also there. And Harriet just told the audience the good news that the holograms are going to be performing first, just the way it's planned. Backstage, just before Jim and the Honkers can perform on stage the way it's planned, Kimber was asking Jim and her bandmates what they thought about the song that she wrote. It looked great, Jim said. And so, 5 seconds later, the Holograms are now on the air and the audience cheered as the Holograms performed their song Dear Diary. It was during the song that Kimber's flashbacks are pouring over on each and every page. Last thing we see of Kimber in her flashback was holding her diary close to her chest. So when the song ended, the audience cheered. Even Harriet was blown away by the song that Kimber wrote. So as the hologram sat down across the way from the Misfits, of course. Next thing you know, Harriet Horn had welcomed a guest to her show, Sean Harrison, and there he is now. The first thing that Sean said was, "The reason why I'm on this show is I want to set the record straight. But first of all, I want to hear from Kimber herself," Sean said, and he agrees to sit right next to her. So after Sean was allowed permission to sit next to Kimber, he says, "Well, I'm not very good at explaining this to you." So when Harry was asking Sean what was his story behind the interview with Cool Trash earlier at the restaurant, he said, "Well, the interview was a lie, a sham, so to speak," Sean explains. In fact, Sean says, "I got nothing but respect for Kimber," he said. So in other words, he knew that the Misfits had been using him all along, and so was Mr. Slugman. But, Sean says, "I not only respected her as a person, but also as an artist herself." Kimber was glad to hear it from Sean. So Sean, who was holding Kimber's hand, and asked a question, "Would you write a song for me?" But before Kimber could answer, that's when Possess interrupted her and says, "Hey, wait a minute. I'm a better songwriter than she is." But then Sean has his turn to speak in his case to tell Possess, "Well, you know the saying, you should never believe everything you read." So then Sean asked Possess a question. "Why don't you just grow up?" Well, that insult made Possess upset. But then, before she could finish her case, that's when Harry says, "Oh, sit down." Well, finally, Kimber gets to answer Sean's question that she will write a song for him. Of course, there's one more question from Harriet. Should Kimber be able to write in her diary again? Well, here's Kimber's answer to that as we go to Kimber's upstairs bedroom in the Starlight Mansion. So not only did Kimber answer Harriet's question that yes, she will, but she learned her lesson. That for now on, she'll never let her diary out of her sight. And even better, Kimber has decided to beat this controversy to a punch. And so that ends episode 3.